Vast majority don't support it. When you go look at Democrats in Congress, the vast majority do support it. There's an absolute disconnect. The numbers are reversed.
And why is that?
That's exactly my point. Why is that? It's not because they're all out for self-interest. It's because they're lobbied by various lobbies, the military-industrial complex, which also has interest in war, the pro-Israel lobby, vast influence that there's money in politics that influence a lot of positions in this country. You're in this town, this whole town is very corrupt, right? The way you influence people is through money, and the same thing with Israel. By the way, you mentioned foreign lobbying. Well, I said Israel lobby. No one would deny. I mean, you watched the Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson that went viral not long ago. Cruz says, I came into politics to defend Israel. They don't say that about any other country. I've never heard an American senator say, I came into politics to defend Belgium. Never heard it. Never heard anyone talk about any other country the way.
Just interject once more.
92% of Democrats don't back Israel's actions in Gaza. So why does Congress keep voting like they do? Mehdi Hasan sits down with the hosts of Trigonometry, and one of them asks a fair, direct question. What's the actual mechanism by which a small country like Israel has this much sway over American politics? It's the question a lot of people ask in good faith. And Mehdi doesn't answer with a slogan. He answers with numbers. Only 8% of Democratic voters approve of Israel's conduct in Gaza. Watch what happens when Mehdi lays that next to how Democrats in Congress actually vote. The gap is enormous. And then he doesn't stop there. He names the mechanism directly. Lindsey Graham, on the record, telling the Wall Street Journal he flew to Israel, got shown intel, and came home convinced. Ted Cruz, on camera, saying he came into politics to defend Israel. A sentence no senator has ever said about any other country on earth. If you've ever wondered why the gap between what Americans want and what Washington does keeps getting wider, I want you to watch this exchange. Because Mehdi doesn't need to raise his voice. He just brings the receipts, one after another, until the "it's just a myth" argument runs out of road. If you're tired of watching real questions get answered with real numbers, only for nothing in Washington to change, subscribe to The Honest Perspective. We follow the receipts, not the noise. I'm Neil. This is The Honest Perspective. 92% is not a myth. It's a mandate nobody in power is listening to. Let's get into it.
Divergence is one of the reasons people keep saying, Israel tricked Trump into this war. Or bullied. I think one of you guests on your show recently talked about how he bullied him. And that's where they lose me, because I don't understand what this supposed mechanism is by which Israel bullies America.
Well, I don't know about the word bully, but let me just say in terms of tricked or manipulated, this is not a conspiracy theory. The beauty of these Republicans, and you're in DC, I know you're going to be speaking to Republicans, the only redeeming feature of the Republican Party right now, they just say the quiet part out loud. People like me don't need to speculate or come up with theory. They just say it. So Lindsey Graham told the Wall Street Journal that I went to Israel and Israel showed me intel that made me think we've got to go to war. That's bizarre. A United States senator went to a foreign government for intel. Then he says, I met with Netanyahu and I coached him, his words, not mine, on how to persuade Trump to get into this war. Again, bizarre that a United States senator and a foreign leader is discussing how they're going to coach, how they're going to persuade, manipulate a sitting president into war. So they're saying this stuff out loud. I'm not absolving Trump of responsibility, but nor am I saying Israel didn't play. Would we be in this war were it not for Israel? No, I think that's very clear.
Of course.
And by the way, if we stop the war tomorrow, just one last point, if Trump would say we're done, we're over, then one of the reasons I think he's not is because he's been told the Israelis aren't stopping. And therefore, as long as the Israelis go, we go.
Well, see, all I'm doing, Mehdi, is trying to pass logically the things that people are saying, including...
Logic and Trump doesn't always go in the same sentence.
Well, sure, fine. But I guess what I'm saying is this. If President Trump didn't want to do this, he wouldn't do it.
Agreed. We are in 100% agreement.
He could very easily say to Iran, we have nothing to do with this. And in fact, we're not even going to shoot down your ballistic missiles if you shoot them at Israel, because we'd want no part in this. And then none of this will be going on. So that's the bit where people lose me when they talk about Israel. I mean, every country wants to manipulate the United States into doing what
and they've been doing it well under Trump.
But
he's easily manipulated.
Russia wants him to make it easier for them in Ukraine.
Yes.
Ukraine wants it to make it easier for them to defeat Russia. China spends huge amounts of money shaping US foreign policy if it can. So does Qatar, so do lots of countries. So I guess the thing that I'm trying to get to the bottom of, because it's such a big talking point in the US right now, is what is the supposed mechanism by which this tiny country of Israel has this outsized power over the President of the United States?
So a couple of things. One is, it's not mutually exclusive, is it, Konstantin, to say that Donald Trump has responsibility. He's a grown man. He may not act like a grown man, but is a grown man and has to take responsibility for decisions he makes. That's not mutually exclusive with saying, but the Israelis also tricked him, manipulated him, lobbied him, bullied him, pressured him. Both of those things can be true at the same time.
All I'm
right?
asking is, what is the mechanism?
Okay, so let's come
by
back.
which
But we
that
accept
happens?
that both those things can be true.
Of course, yeah.
So now we come to what is the Israelis doing. You would accept that. You just listed a bunch of countries, and the Gulf, the Qataris have a lot of influence, the Emiratis have a lot of influence, the Russians sadly have a lot of influence with Trump. You would accept that none of those countries come close to Israel's influence. I don't think there's any question mark about Israel's influence on American policies. The question you're asking about is how.
What's the mechanism?
But no one would deny. I mean, you watched the Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson that went viral not long ago. Cruz says, I came into politics to defend Israel. They don't say that about any other country. I've never heard an American senator say, I came into politics to defend Belgium. Never heard it. Never heard anyone talk about any other country the way.
Just to interject one more thing, if I may. That's not necessarily evidence of Israel having influence. It might well be a case of there are lots of people who live in America who believe, for whatever reason, for religious reasons or for geopolitical reasons, that this is a country with which America should have a close alliance.
So 100% I agree with you. There are Christian evangelicals in this country who believe that the rapture will happen when all the Jews are gathered in this place, and they are even more hardcore pro-Israel than a lot of pro-Israeli Jews. That's 100% true. But there are also a bunch of people in American politics. I know, I've met them, I've interviewed them. They tell me this on and off the record, who are supporting Israel because they're worried about being primaried. They're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about being called anti-Semitic. They're worried about being targeted by AIPAC. They're worried about being targeted by their political opponents, et cetera, et cetera. The idea that there isn't a very, very powerful pro-Israel lobby is absurd, just as there is a very powerful gun lobby, just as there's a very powerful farmer lobby, right? It's funny that when we in this city, people are happy to say, you're owned by the gun lobby. But for good reasons, because of anti-Semitic tropes, people don't want to say you're owned by the Israel lobby.
There's a good reason.
There is a good reason
of
for
course.
it. But the fact is,
let me just
there is an Israel lobby that has massive oversized influence on American politics.
The distinction I'm trying to make, and I think it's an important one, and it's good that we're exploring this, which is, I think the reason people worry about calling it the Israeli lobby versus the gun lobby is the Israeli lobby implies some kind of foreign influence, right? Whereas the point that I think you and I are both making, actually, and in agreement on, is there are lots and lots of Americans who, for whatever reasons, their own personal reasons, view this as an important strategic alliance of the United States or a religious worldview or whatever. So, and I think that's where the distinction becomes difficult.
I think you're, in good faith, overstating the other part of the argument, maybe for argument's sake or devil's advocacy. All I'm saying is, let me give you one example. When you ask Democratic voters, do you support what Israel's doing in Gaza? 8%, according to one poll, said we support it. The
Democrats don't support it. Okay?
Vast majority don't support it. When you go look at Democrats in Congress, the vast majority do support it. There's an absolute disconnect. The numbers are reversed.
And why is that?
That's exactly my point. Why is that? It's not because they're all out for self-interest. It's because they're lobbied by various lobbies, the military-industrial complex, which also has interest in war, the pro-Israel lobby, vast influence that there's money in politics that influence a lot of positions in this country. You're in this town. This whole town is very corrupt. Right? The way you influence people is through money, and the same thing with Israel. By the way, you mentioned foreign lobbying. Well, I said Israel lobby, not Israeli lobby, the lobby for Israel. That can be Americans. But let's just be clear. There's a long history of people trying to get the pro-Israel lobby to register as a foreign agent, just as some pro-Arab lobbies have to register as foreign agents. You go back to RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He wanted to register the precursor to AIPAC. Senator William Leahy, very famous Democrat senator in the 70s, said we should register as a foreign lobby. So there's been a debate for a long time as to whether AIPAC and other such groups should actually register, because they do seem to coordinate with the Israeli government. So that's a separate issue. But look, I take your point. There are many Americans who support Israel. But if you look at the polling, Konstantin, you're in DC at a time when, in astonishing polls I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, that Americans have now switched. They are now supporting Palestinians more than they support Israel. First time in my lifetime. I never thought I would see those polls. Sadly, it took a genocide and tens of thousands of Palestinians to get Americans to switch their positions. But again, if that doesn't translate into Congress, into the presidency, then you have to ask why. Do we have a democratic crisis?
Well, 70% of Republicans support Israel over
Republicans, but the American public,
and the Republicans,
independents and Democrats,
but the Republicans are in power, so that would explain.
But they should also respond to public opinion. It's not like when Democrats they only follow the base. They spend their whole life chasing swing voters.
Don't know about that.
Well, but look at Kamala Harris's election campaign. She didn't go to the left.
Interesting. So but coming back to the Democrats, it's an interesting point you make. So your contention is Democratic politicians fear AIPAC and...
Yes, we're meeting in DC just after a bunch of primaries in Illinois. AIPAC dumped millions of dollars to defeat the critical
Lots of lobbies dumped millions of dollars.
I agree. We said that.
But your claim is that the reason Democratic politicians ignore their voters' concerns about the Middle East, for example, is because of something like AIPAC.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. They're wrong. I'm only quoting them. And I think I made it clear that some people say that. I'm not, I mean, I think we had this conversation with someone else the other day. I'm not convinced of this idea that they want nuclear weapons and the first nuclear weapon they get, they're going to drop it on Tel Aviv.
Insane.
I'm not convinced about that. I think there are some people who...
By the way, Israel has nukes. Can I just remind, we haven't said that in this whole conversation.
Well,
Israel illegally has nukes.
You keep throwing stuff in that's not
But it's relevant
related.
to the conversation. It is relevant. Come on, we spent an hour, half of the talk talking about Iran's nuclear program. I forgot to point out to the viewers, Israel has nukes.
Mehdi, when we had Yossi Cohen, who was the former head of Mossad, I literally made a joke which exposed the fact that Israel has nukes. Of course, Israel, everyone knows Israel has nukes. No one denies it here, right?
Let me start with the question itself, because it's actually a fair one. And that's exactly why it's worth watching how Mehdi answers it. Konstantin asks, what's the supposed mechanism by which a small country like Israel has this much influence over the President of the United States? That's not a bad faith question. A lot of people genuinely don't know the answer or assume it's conspiracy talk. So watch what Mehdi does instead of getting defensive. He doesn't say, trust me. He starts naming things that are already on the public record, said by the very people involved. Lindsey Graham told the Wall Street Journal, in his own words, that he flew to Israel, was shown intelligence, and came back believing the U.S. had to go to war. Sit with that for a second. A sitting United States senator went to a foreign government for intelligence and then came home to help sell a war to his own country based on what that foreign government showed him. Then Mehdi adds the second piece. Graham has also said, in his own words, that he met with Netanyahu and coached him on how to persuade Trump. Not, we discussed strategy. Coached him. A U.S. senator coaching a foreign prime minister on how to manipulate the American president. Mehdi's point isn't a theory he's building. It's a quote he's reading. And then he goes further, because Konstantin's implicit challenge is essentially prove there's something unique here and not just ordinary alliance politics. So Mehdi brings Ted Cruz on camera with Tucker Carlson saying, I came into politics to defend Israel. And here's the plain, simple test Mehdi applies. Has any American senator ever said that sentence about any other country? Not Britain. Not Japan. Not Germany. Nobody has ever said, I came into politics to defend Belgium. That's not rhetoric. That's just true. And it's the kind of fact that's genuinely hard to argue with because there isn't a counterexample sitting anywhere in American political history. Now, here's where I actually want to give Konstantin real credit, because good commentary should. He doesn't fold or get flustered. He pushes back with a real point. Maybe this isn't foreign influence at all. Maybe it's just a lot of Americans, for their own religious or geopolitical reasons, who happen to believe in a close alliance with Israel. That's a legitimate distinction to raise. And Mehdi doesn't dismiss it. He agrees completely that Christian evangelicals exist, that some of them are more hardline pro-Israel than many Israelis themselves. He grants the point fully. That's what a real exchange of ideas looks like, not one side refusing to concede anything. But then Mehdi adds the piece that actually settles it, and it's the piece with real teeth. He says, I've talked to people in American politics, on and off the record, who tell me directly that they support Israel, not because of belief, but because they're afraid. Afraid of being primaried, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of being called anti-Semitic, afraid of being targeted by IPAC. That's not shared values. That's political self-preservation under financial pressure, which is a completely different phenomenon than genuine belief. And it's the phenomenon Konstantin's original question was actually about. And here's the number that turns this from an argument into a documented fact. Only 8% of Democratic voters approve of Israel's conduct in Gaza. 8%. That's not a fringe minority opinion inside the party. That's the rank and file, overwhelmingly on record in the polling. And yet watch the votes in Congress. The overwhelming majority of Democratic representatives keep voting to continue military support. That gap between 8% of the base and a governing majority in the party's own representatives is not a mystery. It's not a coincidence. It's the clearest evidence in the entire conversation that something other than Democratic representation is deciding these votes. If elected officials represented their voters on this issue, the vote count in Congress should look something like the poll numbers. It doesn't. That gap is the receipt. I want to be precise about what this is and isn't, because it matters. This isn't an argument that Israel secretly controls America, and Mehdi is careful never to say that. It's an argument that a well-funded, well-organized lobby, like the gun lobby, like the pharmaceutical lobby, like any other powerful interest group in this country, has built enough leverage through campaign spending and primary threats that elected Democrats vote against what their own voters overwhelmingly want. Mehdi even names why people are reluctant to call it that plainly. Say you're owned by the gun lobby and nobody blinks. Say you're owned by the Israel lobby and suddenly people worry about what that implies. But avoiding the phrase doesn't make the mechanism less real. It just makes people afraid to name it, which is exactly the dynamic Mehdi is describing in the first place. And then there's the moment that ties the whole thing together with almost no effort at all. The throwaway line near the end of the interview where Mehdi points out, almost as an aside, that Israel itself has nuclear weapons, and nobody in over an hour of discussing Iran's nuclear program had mentioned it. Think about what that omission says. An entire conversation about the danger of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, and the one country in the region that already has the weapons everyone's afraid of getting built, didn't come up once until Mehdi said it out loud. That's not an accident either. That's what decades of political pressure actually produces. Not just votes in Congress, but entire categories of fact that quietly don't get said on air. So here's where this lands. Konstantin asked a real question, and to his credit, he stayed in the exchange and conceded real ground rather than digging in. But the honest answer to his question was sitting in the public record the whole time. Senators admitting on the record they get briefed by a foreign government before deciding U.S. policy. Senators bragging about coaching foreign leaders on manipulation, only 8% of a party's own voters backing the policy their representatives keep funding, and an entire hour of nuclear anxiety that somehow skipped the one country in the room that already has the bomb. That's not a myth. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just what happens when you actually go looking for the receipts instead of assuming the answer is too uncomfortable to name. If you believe democracy should mean elected, officials actually represent the people who elected them, even on the hard, uncomfortable topics. Subscribe to The Honest Perspective. We go looking for the mechanism, not the myth. I'm Neil. 8% of the base. A governing majority in Congress. Somewhere between those two numbers is the whole answer. That's The Honest Perspective, and that's where I'll leave you.